Hey RV family, keep it tight. My name is J Morse, the review guy reviewing music for the love of music, and I'm back again to bring you another video. And in this one I'm going to be covering the new Benighted record entitled Obscene Repressed. 9th studio-length album by the French deathgrind and brutal death metal band Benighted. A huge love affair for me in terms of deathgrind. I know that some people don't necessarily enjoy them as much as I do, which generally just comes down to the great vocals of Julien. I usually enjoy deathgrind that is more centered around the death metal than the grindcore, such as Cattle Decapitation. More so a fan of death metal with grindcore mixed in, and some of the way the blast beats are played and some of the shouted vocals, as opposed to, say, a straight-bred Napalm Death grind type, as I think that some of Napalm Death's more death metal centric records are some of their weakest personally. One of the major reasons I love and respect Benighted so much is this record right here, their 2011 record, Asylum Cave, which I think is a super overlooked record. If you're a fan of death grind, go check it out. But here on Repressed, I was really excited by a lot of the singles. It was shaping up to be one of my more anticipated records of the year, considering the fact that Benighted just consistently comes out with these hard-hitting death grind records, although I do feel like every record they've dropped post-Asylum Cave have not necessarily been their strongest. But on Obscene Repressed, they find a way to up the intensity, the production levels are through the roof. Once again, the Cattle Decapitation comparison still has to kind of come into the forefront. It's that type of death grind. It still has a sloppy sound. I could just definitely foresee certain people thinking that it does sound mechanical. But throughout their past two records, they've had a complete redux of their entire lineup. Julien being the only initial member that is still in the band, and his vocals still remain. His utilization of these deep guttural growls and these sloppy layered vocals, and of course the pig squeals that you come to expect from Benighted. And as a whole cohesive project, I do think that Obscene Repressed is their best record since Asylum Cave. It's a super compact track listing. One thing that I do appreciate that I do think makes this record a little bit different than the others in Benighted's canon is simply their ability to incorporate different sort of grooves that you don't necessarily hear from them or aren't as catchy as they are on this record. Take the first track, which isn't even that long, but the galloping riffs throughout this track just cascade along in a way that is super satisfying to listen to and surprisingly catchy. It's not as meat and potatoes death metal as you would come to expect from old school death metal such as a Cannibal Corpse or an Obituary or something along those lines. It's much more akin to Death with how they played with technicality alongside brutality. Case in point, the track The Starving Beast. Of course this track is packed with blast beats and pig squeals in the typical Benighted formula, but around the minute-and-a-half mark it really does go into this down, low, chuggy bit. In terms of being dejected and in terms of being bleak, this record pretty much nails the narrative entirely, while still sticking to a formula that any Benighted fan is going to immediately be able to identify. Like the track Smoke Through the Skull is like a throwback. The introduction where it's just a roared out vocal that leads into the instrumentation reminded me right away of "Let the blood spill between my broken teeth." I also think that whereas a lot of their records stay in more of the true blue death grind vicinity that is much like a lot of the other bands that play around in that wheelhouse, this record features some of their most dynamic and intricately written songs that they have dropped in a hot minute, even rivaling some of the best on Asylum Cave or one-upping it. Yes, they up the ante on tracks like Implore the Negative. Once again, these galloping death metal riffs, but the vocals are more shouted. They're very, very grindcore-centric. Perhaps some of the most grindcore-centric vocalizations that I've heard on a Benighted track. It's really rare to see them go in that sort of direction, and of course you are getting past the gruff vocals. They're kind of interchanging and interlocking at various points, but for the most part it's like these shouted grindcore vocals, much like, say, Barney Greenway from Napalm Death. Which is an interesting observation that they go with more of the classic grindcore material as opposed to, say, newer grindcore. Let's say, even though it's not newer in the grand scheme of things, say a Pig Destroyer, which opts for more of a throaty, shrieked, raspy type delivery, which a lot of grindcore bands do nowadays, especially when you go into the gore grind genre, which are just unintelligible. And even though Casual Piece of Meat also breaches the 4-minute mark like Implore the Negative, and doesn't necessarily have the trademark progression that Implore the Negative has, there is something to be said with how they pack out a track with some of the most horrific soundscapes, making it sound absolutely relentless like a beating. The dueling guitars have an absolute buzzsaw to them, rhythm, the bass work is super gnarly. Julien makes sure to pack these tracks with great vocalizations. I will say the last 4 tracks on the record, though, do hit a bit of a weak point in general for songwriting, I will say. They're super hard-hitting, they're super punchy, the production really does do it a lot of favors, but as a fan of Benighted, as a longtime fan of Benighted that has listened to their entire discography, you kind of reach a point with this record that it feels like Benighted is somewhat just copying their own material and just kind of tweaking it ever so slightly to make it work. And Benighted is one of those bands that consistency is their best friend, and changing up their formula wouldn't necessarily do them much, considering the main reason they are so appealing for me is just their overall heaviness. And honestly, with those pig squeals, with some of the blast beats, that mechanical edge, it does sound unbelievable. It does sound kind of corny sometimes, it does sound over the top, but not in a bad way. The sheer animosity, the sheer bitterness that is felt in these lyrics and the way the vocals come across, it's palpable. The sheer passion, these outbursts of just resentment, you can really feel that. I will say grindcore has just had an amazing year. And this record feels like madness. So while people might not personally agree with my thoughts on this record, I think dynamics-wise, diversity-wise, the band didn't have to knock it out of the park to make a satisfying record, and for the most part they didn't, but with tracks like Implore the Negative, I do appreciate their ability to play around with technicality, to play around progressions, while not abandoning their initial style that makes them endearing to listen to in the first place and really makes them just feel like you're getting a train coming right at you and you're tied to the tracks. This is a band that I personally love, and I think that they did a great job on this record, and I do highly suggest it to anyone that enjoys deathgrind. I'm going to be giving this album a 7.5 out of 10, and that is a wrap. Have you heard this new Benighted record, Obscene Repressed? If you have, let me know in the comment section below what you thought about it. I would love to discuss your record with you. Be sure to like this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe to join the review family today, and smash that notification bell to be notified of my future uploads. You know who it is, my name is Morse, the Review Guy, and I'm signing off saying farewell.